So in today's video, I want to talk a little bit about the visor lighting sequence within the Corsair IQ software. So I get the occasional question about the visor lighting sequence on the channel, and I thought it would be a good idea just to do a quick video, kind of explain how it works. Because if you're like me, the visor sequence is one of those things that kind of drew you into the Corsair ecosystem in the first place. So the key takeaway from this video, and let's establish this, is that there is a predetermined device sequence. And if we go ahead and just establish right off here, there's no way that I'm aware of, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, there's no way I'm aware of to change the order of this sequence. It's hard-coded from Corsair. So in every test that I did, the very first device to fire is going to be your keyboard, followed by the mouse. So the next device in the sequence to fire is going to be the Lighting Node Pro. This is going to be the first RGB controller that fires off. But this has got two 3-pin RGB ports on here. Now it's going to fire port number 1 first. Now oftentimes you might have one of these RGB fan hubs connected to that. So when it fires port number 1, it's going to go through and light all 6 fans up in order, 1 through 6. Then it's going to do port 2. So if you had another RGB fan hub connected to that, it would then fire that device within order. After the Lighting Node Pro, the Lighting Node Core is the next device to fire. And it's just going to go through order, ports 1 through 6. So the next device after the Lighting Node Core is going to be the Commander Core XT. That's going to be the next one to fire. It's going to fire the hub, the RGB hub. So fans 1 through 6 is what's going to fire first. Now this does have a 3-pin RGB port. So after it fires through the RGB hub, then it's going to fire off on this RGB port. All right, so after the Commander Core XT, we're going to fire off the Commander Pro. An oldie but a goodie. We've talked about this one a number of different times on this channel. Now the Commander Pro just simply has two 3-pin RGB ports, much like the Lighting Node Pro. In fact, it's really just the same thing. So it's going to fire these ports in order. So port 1 and port 2. So after the Commander Pro, the next device in the list is going to be the Commander Core. Now you'll find the Commander Core coming with some of the AIOs. So that's when you'll have this. It's got a little AIO port here on the end of it. Now it will fire the pump first if it's connected. If it's not connected, obviously it'll just go through the 6-port RGB hub here. Assuming the AIO is connected, because really that's one of the few reasons you would have this device, the pump is going to fire first. Now what I notice is if the pump, this is one of the few anomalies in this sequence that I found, is if the pump is connected, obviously the pump fires first, but then the memory will fire, like right after the pump. And I can kind of see why maybe they reordered it. The memory fires off, followed by the RGB hub here. Memory would be next. If, say you didn't have this, memory would be next in the list, but if you're using this, memory is going to fire, right after the pump. Just be aware of that fact. So the devices that fired next was the LS100, which is the lighting strips. They go behind your monitor. That was kind of how they were originally intended. And after that, once that fires, it's the LT100 that fires, which is the lighting towers. I've got a couple of these up here. So the final device to fire off was the Nanoleaf device. Yes, Nanoleaf does play a part in visor. It looks pretty cool. It's a good way to cap it off. So once it's done there, it comes right back, just the same exact device order in reverse. So let's discuss real quick what happens when you add more than one of the same controller type. So for example, I've added 2 Commander Core XTs here. IQ recognizes them just fine. They do fire one after another in a series. So but I was not able to really determine how IQ determines which controller is going to be first and which one's going to be second. I believe there is some under the covers identifier that gets added into the software, and I tried powering them off at different times and adding them in different sequences and things like that. But I think IQ registers the ID somewhere. The one thing I did not test yet was uninstalling IQ and reinstalling it. That might do it if you left one controller there. Maybe somebody has tried that, but just know for now that you can configure them separately. You'll just have to really kind of test with it to see which one's firing first and which one's firing second. So I also want to discuss the H100i AIO real quick. Now what's different about this AIO is the pump assembly is the controller. So coming off of that pump are 2 cables where the fans plug into. And I didn't test it in my normal testing because it's installed in another PC over here. but it does fire after the Commander Core XT. So my recommendation is if you're using the H100i or something similar, just test it out and make sure that you know where in the sequence those fans are going to light. Now you could undo those fans from the AIO and plug them into a regular controller if you choose to do it that way. Either way is fine. Just be aware the H100i is going to be a little bit of a special device. The only other device I'll comment on is the little lighting accent triangles. They plug into the 3-pin RGB ports on one of the controllers, and they just fire off whenever that port does. Okay, so let's talk about what you can do to kind of make this look a little bit better. Now this is going to be easier to do if you're just first building your PC or if you're just first implementing Corsair controllers, because then you can make a better determination of where fans are going to go and things like that. If you've already got it set up and it's not working right and you decide you need to rearrange this your configuration a little bit, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to do. So step one is just knowing the order of the sequence, right? Which RGB controller fires first, and just lay that out. Maybe just put it on a piece of paper and kind of map out your setup, and you know kind of which order all the ports are going to fire in, and then you can make a determination. Just look at your case, and if you care, right, you might not care which order it goes, but you need to be aware of, as it's flowing through here, how do you want that to look in your case? Do you want that to come from the back to the front or the front to the back? Right? And you need to be mindful it goes over to the side and it goes down to the bottom and things like that. So you just want to kind of lay out your case, maybe just draw, a map on a piece of paper, draw your controllers and where every fan's going to connect to, and using this ordered sequence, just make a determination as to which controller your fans need to be on. One thing I thought about that kind of screws this up a little bit is the firing of these 3-pin RGB ports. So if you just want your whole sequence to flow through all your fans, and you're going to switch over to another controller, and it's going to hit that 3-pin RGB port. And if you've got devices there, it's going to, trail off into those devices and then come back to your fans, and it can be disruptive to this view. And so what you could do, now you may have to make some compromises in here at the end of the day. It just depends on what devices you're going to have, what looks you want. I would argue in a lot of cases, unless Visor is just so critically important, and it might be if you're here watching this video, but in a lot of my setups that I've done, I've just conceded that, I've got different types of fans on different controllers, and it's like Visor looks pretty good. It's not exactly free-flowing from start to finish because it's going to go off, and I use a lot of non-Corsair RGB accent pieces and just for fun. And so it kind of breaks it up a little bit. But overall, I don't really care. So if at this point you're watching this video and you're like, man, I really don't care that much about Visor, and this is a lot of work to try to sequence it all and get it all looking, don't overthink it. You can just plug all your fans in, plug your controllers in, and not pay a whole lot of attention to this. And you still have every other lighting sequence within IQ that goes to all of them, and it looks great. None of the other lighting sequences, none of this matters. So I've tried a couple of different ways in IQ to deal with this 3-pin lighting issue. I started by creating a new profile and then removed the 3-pin lighting object from that profile specifically. The problem is it seems to remove it across all of your profiles. And so that's not a really good solution. Let me know in the comments below if you've had other results with that. The second way I tried is in the profile, I can remove just the quick lighting zone, so I can uncheck the box. The problem with that is that when Visor is running, even if the box is unchecked, it won't light the object up at that point, but there's a delay in the sequence, like it's still running through it. It just doesn't light it. I think that's something Corsair should address. So one thing you can do if Visor is really important, the flow of it, and you've got some 3-pin RGB in there, you might be able to get away. You could front load the first controller. This is if you have 2 controllers. Front load the first controller with fans, and then maybe put the remaining fans on the second one, right, up to 12 if you're using like 2 Core XTs. And then that second controller, provided it's a Core XT or a Pro, you could put your 3-pin RGB on that. And so you could get that in order so that it fires all your fans in order the way that you want it, and then it fires your 3-pin RGB. The other thing you could consider is, if that's an important consideration, is maybe add a Lighting Node Pro. It's a fairly small controller, and if you're just using some strips or some non-Corsair RGB, you could add all of your 3-pin RGB to that device, which fires first, and then you could leave those off of your other fan controller so that you could smooth that out. Again, you know, it's how ridiculous do you want to get? And does it really matter that much? Just trying to give you some ideas and things you can think about. So now let's talk real quick about the ordering of fans. Now we've established that the devices have to be in a very specific sequence. You can't change that within Corsair iCUE. But let's say you got 2 Core XTs and you got 12 fans, right? And you know that these 6 fans are going to go on this first controller, so you just want to plug them in. You don't necessarily need to be too worried about which port they go in, because after you do that, you can go to the lighting setup function and it will just light up an individual light on each one, and then you can rearrange it right within Corsair iCUE as to which port to fire first. So that'll save you a little bit of time and frustration. I still try to get it pretty close, but you know, don't worry about it too much. And then you could do the same thing with the second controller and the second set of 6 fans. Go to the lighting setup, it will just light an individual LED, and you can look at the representation within iCUE. Now you can rotate it left or right, just make that match as best you can your model. Or if it doesn't look right during the animation, you can come back and reorient it. The idea is that you're going to match the model up in iCUE with the way that the fan physically looks. You don't change the physical fan, change it in iCUE. It knows which way to orient that. So anyways, be aware of that. It's a little time saver, a little bit of a trick you can do, but you do have to do each controller individually. As much as you can, before you tidy up all of your cable management and zip tie it all together, whatever you're going to do, if you have the ability to load iCUE on it and test it before you do that final cable management completion, give it a test. Make sure it looks acceptable to you in the way that you like it, because that's the time to make changes. You know, it's a real pain after you zip tie cables together to have to go in and cut it all apart and redo it. Anyways, I hope that was helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments about this video, if I can help out, please let me know in the comments below. I'll get to those the best I can when I can. And if you have any advice for everybody, if you've noticed something different, you got a setup that's not working the way I outlined it here, please let me know. Let us know in the comments below. There could be some other hardware out there that fits in the middle of this, or some anomalies that change it that I'm not aware of. So help the community out and put those in the comments. That will be helpful to everybody. As always, thanks for watching.